All right, Craig's good.
Hey, thank you all for coming. Welcome to the Shorebird AMA. We haven't done one of these in a while. Um, yeah, so I presume most of you have used Shorebird before, but if you haven't, we have built Code Push for Flutter, one of the top most upvoted issues for Flutter of all time. Well, actually, the most upvoted issue for Flutter of all time. Lets you update your Flutter apps on users' devices instantly, just by pushing a button on your desktop. We've been out for about a year on Android, and we launched iOS a couple months ago. You haven't heard very much from us in quite some time because we've been incredibly heads down on getting iOS out. But now that that's out and stable, and we're seeing some of our larger customers start to use it, we are starting to make more noise. Hence today, and we actually have another AMA on Reddit, a text-based AMA later this week. If you missed this one. Before we get started, I want to introduce the team. So we have four of us here today. Myself, Felix, Brian. Actually, Eric isn't here yet. But so three of us here today. Felix, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Felix. Been at Shorebird for a little over a year now. I think similar to Brian. And before Shorebird, I worked at VGV. You probably know me from a lot of the open source work I did, things like Block, Mason, etc. And then before that, I worked at BMW and was helping them transition from native to Flutter. And that's kind of where my Flutter journey started. Off to you, Brian.
Yes. Hello. I'm Brian. I've been at Shorebird for a little over a year at this point. Prior to that, I worked at Google on the internal, very confusingly named Flutter at Google team, which is distinct from the Flutter team that worked at Google. My job was ITL, the team that helped with Flutter adoption internally. So Google teams building their apps in Flutter, I helped them do it.
Cool. And hopefully many of you know me. I co-founded the Flutter project 10 years ago, led the Flutter team and Dart team at Google until I left a couple years ago and started Shorebird. So if you'd like to ask a question, please do so in the chat. I think I see some people already doing that. And Brian will figure out how to wrangle that. We are recording this audio, so you're welcome to request to speak and ask the question directly that way. Just know you are being recorded, and we'll post this all on YouTube later this week sometime. And yeah, as I mentioned before, we're also going to be having a text-based AMA on Reddit later this week, so stay tuned for more interest. So please ask away, and we are here to answer.
And
Yes,
your
we got
question?
our first question, which is let us know how you built the Dart interpreter and what it is. I believe they are asking about I think this is referring to the simulator for iOS.
Yep.
Yeah, it has a bunch of names. But yes, as part of complying with the Apple Store guidelines, updated code must be run through an interpreter. So we cobbled together an interpreter for Dart. We interpret something that is very close to the same machine code that the actual machine runs. The reason why we do that is it allows us to compare very easily to make sure that the final product, we can compare the final built patch with the original release and better understand what has changed. If we use some higher level abstraction, it would be harder to map between those two. And so we compile down to this pretty low level abstraction, and then we run it in an interpreter. An interpreter is just, instead of running commands directly on the hardware, we run commands in C++ code. And we built it by starting from a debug interpreter that Dart already had for debugging purposes, and we made it a little bit more production ready and taught it how to run Flutter, which it had forgotten how to do in the last 10 years. It used to work, but it had forgotten at some point. There's actually an article that we posted about a little bit of this, not about the interpreter part, but some about the linker part. What am I missing, Felix? You've worked on this for a year.
Yeah, no, I think you covered a lot of it. Yeah, I was just about to link to the article. I just dropped the link. And yeah, I think there's just been a lot of intricacies, like Eric alluded to, of like Dart does a lot of things to optimize the code that you write, and it does things like inlining code. It does things like using concepts that I didn't know before, like the dispatch table and the object pool. And all these things ultimately make it difficult for us to know what code has changed and what code hasn't changed, so that we can interpret as little as possible and make your app run as fast as possible. And so it's been a wild ride, and I mean we're still working out some more kinks, but yeah, I think we're really happy with where we're at right now. And yeah, if there are any specific questions, we can maybe try to talk more about those. It looks like people want a video or maybe some more content on how this all works.
Sure.
None of us are professional video editors or anything, but we can try to I definitely think we can put out more content on the lower level stuff, because it does seem like a lot of folks are interested.
Yeah, I just reread the question. It asked like, what is it? I don't know that
Yeah.
I've described it very well. So at a super high level, if you don't understand what compilers do or what interpreters are, the interpreter is just a way of running code without compiling it all the way down to machine code and running it on the physical hardware. So a language like Lua or JavaScript sometimes, where you write a program to run your program rather than taking your source code and compiling it to something that runs directly on a machine. Like there's an intermediary layer, and for whatever reason, Apple has that as a restriction, that intermediary layer exists when you're doing updated code. And so we had to build one for Dart in order to comply with the App Store guidelines. This was one of the things that held back code push from being solvable on iOS before that, is this App Store restriction and this lack of functionality in the Dart ecosystem. There's another package called Dart Eval, which writes a Dart interpreter, but in Dart itself. We essentially have a thing like that. It's just in C++, and so still way slower than running Dart on the physical hardware, but faster than, say, running Dart inside Dart. Or I believe it is. I haven't actually done a lot of testing, but I would expect that to be the case.
So our next question is about on-prem hosting. I think maybe we probably explain what that is and why someone would want it and where we are on a roadmap with it.
Yeah, so those are all difficult questions at some level. On-prem means different things to different people. We don't currently have any sort of on-prem, cloud-prem, self-hosted support. We don't currently have plans to do so soon. That's still an ongoing conversation. We're actually in the middle of some of that planning conversation right now, but we do not currently have support, and we do not currently have plans to add support. We may change that plan, but that's the current at time of writing. Why would someone write that? Or why would someone want that? There's all sorts of reasons. The ecosystem is very split today. Like, I think, lots of people use GitHub and, don't self-host GitHub. Lots of people use Sentry and don't self-host Sentry. So clearly lots of people use centrally hosted services. We have done that mostly for our own engineering budget. And I don't mean money. It's just simply time. Like, supporting more configurations is hard. And we have, you're looking at most of the company here. We just don't have a lot of engineering budget to go around. And so we're working on things that everyone can benefit from before we work on things that only some customers need.
And I linked to the issue that we have open tracking this. So if on-prem or self-hosting is a blocker for your team, I think the best thing to do is like that issue and then let us know if there's any specific aspect. Because I think there's also, like Eric mentioned, like, is storage the thing? Like, do you want to maintain the patches on your own servers, or do you want to be able to self-host like the entire Shorebird infrastructure? So there's lots of different variations of that, and it would be helpful to understand what folks' requirements are around on-prem / self-hosting.
So our next question is, are you guys planning to have internships?
No, not anytime soon. There again, we just simply don't have the engineering budget. I worked a lot with the Google Summer of Code project long time ago when it was just getting started. And you can meet some amazing people that way. I've had amazing interns at both Apple and Google, but understandably, interns require, time to teach them things, which is great. I think when we're larger, we will certainly have lots of interns, but we're just too small to do that these days. That said, we're fully open source. Well, we're not fully open source, but we're mostly open source, and it is possible certainly to participate via open source. But we're just not large enough to support interns. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, moving on to the next question. So we've got a bunch of questions that are kind of clumping around two different topics. So we'll try to group those together. So one is about unintended native changes and unsafe patches in prod. One of the questions is, to read it out, is if a package upgrade happens to have changes native code, will we be warned that it won't work, since Shorebird does not allow native changes? And this is true. Shorebird can only update Dart code. We cannot update the app or the non-Dart portions of your app. So if you change Swift, Objective-C, Kotlin, whatever non-Dart code you have, Shorebird cannot update that. And that is often a problem if you use plugins. So that is native code that communicates with Dart. They have each plugin has its own API, and generally they're meant to be updated in tandem. So if the native part of the API changes, the Dart side of the API also has to change to support the new, I guess, API signature. So if you update one without the other, you're going to have a bad time. And as much as we can, we warn at patch time if we detect native changes that cannot be patched. By default, on CI, this will fail unless you pass a flag that is, I believe it is allow native diffs. We do not recommend this unless you are 100% sure that your change is safe. Unfortunately, on iOS at least, it is kind of difficult to tell. Xcode does not always produce deterministic builds, which is to say that given the same code, the binary it produces is not always identical, and so it can be a little tricky to tell whether or not there are native changes. Right now, what we do is we hash the podfile.lock file. And so if you've had changes in your plugins, we will warn you about that. However, unfortunately, we don't have a great way to detect changes to other native code at the moment. So if you have your own custom, Swift, Kotlin, whatever code, you need to be very careful with that.
And I think on that topic, we do recommend, and we have docs on staging your patches. So if you're not sure, you can always create a patch and push it to a staging environment so that you can preview it locally and verify that everything works the way you expect before promoting it to production. And we recently added an ability to do that via an API, so you can programmatically promote patches as well. Previously, you can only do it from the console. So it's always a good idea if you're not sure, just use caution and promote your patch to the production environment only after you've verified it in staging. And yeah, Eric dropped a link to the docs.
I see Eric has joined us. Eric, you want to introduce yourself? Want to give yourself a couple of sentences of who you are?
Yeah, for sure. Hello everyone. Guess I'm a little bit late for the chat. I'm Eric, the other Eric, I guess, and I'm the latest member of Shorebird. I'm from Brazil, and yeah, I guess that's about
You
it.
worked at BGV. You've worked on Flame. You've been around the Flutter block quite a while.
Yeah, for sure. I wasn't prepared to the introduction, so thank you. Yeah. I work at the BGV previously with Felix. I have been a maintainer of Flame, the Flame game engine for those who are into game dev in Flutter development for the past 6 years. So some people might know me from the game dev scene. Yeah, about it.
Great. What's our next question, Brian?
Is the interpreter built from scratch? Actually, hold on. Let me make sure I'm reading this correctly. Is the interpreter from scratch or required using existing code paths from the Dart Lang project? I think I'm understanding this to mean that did we write it from scratch, or was there an existing simulator in Dart? And the short answer is we built off of something that already existed in Dart, but I will let either Eric or Felix speak more to that because they are the experts.
Correct. So we started with the Dart simulator, which was a debugging concept inside Dart, and we've heavily modified it. We've heavily modified the surrounding Dart. The part of the reason for that, and one of the things that makes Shorebird possible, is that when you have different modes of execution, you need to teach the entire runtime how to like be able to swap between these modes. When like for just this function, we're going to use that mode of execution. And so that was a large project that had already been done for us to support this simulator concept. And then we, took advantage of those existing pathways and started from some of that same base code, but we have modified it significantly since then. This is actually, this sort of, these multiple pathways is a common thing that exists, for example, in JavaScript. So for example, when you load a web page, the very first time the JavaScript runs, it runs inside a JavaScript interpreter. But then as the page loads more, some of those functions will then be compiled. But sometimes they're compiled like in a really fast manner where it doesn't take very long to compile them, but the resulting compiled code is not very good. And then maybe later the JavaScript engine will then say, hey, you're using this function a lot. I'm going to take my time and do a really nice high quality compilation of this so that then every time you run that function, it runs as fast as possible. So Dart doesn't have that sort of 3-tiered system, but it does have, some tiers, and one of those was the simulator, and we were able to hook in through those methods.
Cool. And the next question, also simulator related. How can a machine run interpreter code if it's not compiled? A machine can only understand compiled code. Bytecode, I think we addressed this a little bit earlier, talking about the difference between compilers and interpreters and compiled code and interpreted code. But
yeah, I don't know. So when you say compiled, typically I think about compiling for a physical hardware machine. In the same way that you, but I also, you can imagine compile sort of in the same way that like an image is rasterized, right? You turn the image from like math, the source, into like pixels. We do a similar thing in that we turn your program from source into a compiled form, but that compiled form is not destined to run on the physical iOS hardware. It's destined to run in our interpreter. So it's a similar process. And again, we talked about this before, that we intentionally make them very similar so that we can, at a very late stage in the process, compare, byte for byte compatible, like how much to try and understand at a very fine grained level. Because Dart has all sorts of things where, like, when you add a function or remove a function or add a class, remove a class, like that doesn't mean that you will necessarily produce sort of equivalent changes downstream. Like Dart has a bunch of inlining and tree shaking and all these complex things that it applies in its pipeline. And so we want to compare as late as possible in the pipeline, even if we don't produce the exact same, out result as, would be destined to run on physical hardware if the result was aiming for physical hardware.
And next is, well, it's not really a question, but I will allow it. The person says, just want to say thanks to the Shorebird team. I already use Shorebird for more than half a year, and it helps me develop a project for the company I work at now. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you are very welcome. Very happy to, it's great to work on a thing that people use and like. And yeah, it's good to hear those messages. Next question is, will there ever be support for pushing to the stores directly? Getting debug symbols pushed to the Play Store would be a nice quality of life improvement.
Probably. Fastlane already does some of this, and we have some documentation as to how you can use Fastlane. So this is sort of two questions. The first half is like, will we ever support pushing to the store directly? Potentially. We don't have support today. If we did, we would probably sit on top of Fastlane. But so we do have docs about using Fastlane. And the second thing is getting debug symbols to push to Play Store would be a nice quality of life improvement. So these exist today. if you go to the console and you click on one of your releases, we list all the various symbols that you might want there, including the symbols for your compiled Dart, including the symbols for your underlying app, and including the Flutter framework symbols that for our fork of Flutter framework. We don't have like an automated upload tool, but we would be happy to work with you or someone else to like integrate with whatever upload system you want. It's a very small amount of work from where we are to actually having those automatically sent to play on your behalf.
The next question is, why do we keep our forked version of the Dart SDK private?
So that's basically it's one of very few repositories that we have that is private. And the reason is that that's just where we just spent a year and $1 million. And like we spent a lot of time and energy and money on making that work. And I just don't think open source is the right result for that. That's sort of our crown jewels at the moment.
Next question is, Shorebird seems like a feature on top of Flutter rather than a separate product. Is there any chance the same feature could come from Flutter itself in the future?
There certainly is. When I led the Flutter team, there were many attempts at doing code push. There are many different internal code push products that Google uses. But the Flutter team has mentioned publicly, you can go read their roadmap. And there's a line at the end of this year's roadmap, which is very similar to last year's and the year before and the year before, that they do not intend to do code push. So we did.
The next question is it possible to partially use Shorebird for separate modules instead of the whole app? I'm not exactly sure what is meant by separate modules here. If you're asking if you can ship Shorebird in a library that is then consumed by other apps, the answer to that is no. But if you are wanting to update you've got like multiple library, you've got your app split into multiple packages, you've got like a monorepo style app. Any Dart updates you make in those can be updated through Shorebird.
I suspect the overall, I don't fully understand the question, but I expect the overall answer is probably yes. It just depends on the nuance. Like if modules means, AARs, Brian answered that to some degree. If modules means like Dart's deferred loading support, like that, there's complexity here. Please file an issue. We'd love to sort it out with you exactly what it is that you want to do. I suspect the answer is yes, but it probably is a little off the beaten path from what we have documented today.
Yeah, and because Shorebird is tied to it is basically a modification to the Flutter engine. If what you're wanting is to push a library that can update via Shorebird that is not contained in an app, that will not work. The next question is, what is the status of pushing static assets to Flutter? I think this is just a question about asset support.
We haven't started. Well, that's not true. We did start. We have not completed asset support. I think it's on the relatively short list of things that we will do in the coming months. But it doesn't currently have a date. We're not very far away from making it a reality. It just would require, a week or so of work. So it's just a scheduling question.
Next question is, I like this one. Will there be a more streamlined rollback process? I know you have something planned, but instead of having to push a new patch, can we set a certain patch from the list as the active one? And there will be. I am working on that right now, actually. That is my current project. So the idea is that you could say, I want to roll back this patch. And whichever the last patch was, or the base release, if there were no prior patches, will be the one that your users see. So that is in progress, and we hope to ship that optimistically sometime this week. Next question, I think, is one that has been addressed in the chat a little bit. I think I don't know that we'll be able to solve this in this forum, but someone mentioned that they patched their iOS app to preview locally, and there were some weird behaviors. what could be causing that. Not specifically in this case, because I don't think we have enough information to debug here. But we have been fixing some issues, specifically with iOS previewing, or excuse me, iOS patching. And Felix, you've been doing that work, so I think I'll hand the mic figuratively
Yeah.
over to you.
So I think things that we would love if you're seeing issues on iOS specifically are to double check that you're using the latest release of Shorebird and specifically the latest revision of Flutter, since it doesn't really matter what version of the CLI, of Shorebird CLI you're using. What really matters is the version of Flutter that you're using. And so one thing that I think confuses a lot of people is when you patch, just because you've patched with the newest version of Shorebird CLI doesn't mean you're getting all of the goodness in terms of performance improvements and bug fixes that we've made, because when you patch, Shorebird looks up the release that you're patching and it builds with the exact same version of Flutter that you released with. So in order to actually benefit from all the improvements that we've made recently, you'll need to make sure that you re-release using the latest version of Shorebird and Flutter. And we just released a new version right before this AMA. So I think the latest version is 1.1.19 of Shorebird CLI. And if after releasing and patching with the latest version, you're still seeing weirdness, I think the best thing to do would be to just reach out to us on Discord or file an issue on GitHub, and we will take a closer look. We have a bunch of improvements to our diagnostics to make it easier to figure out where things are going wrong. But yeah, I think if you're not already using the latest versions of everything, that'd be where I start. Yeah, and hopefully that helps.
And generally, just always use the latest versions of everything if you can. Like we're working to improve everything all the time, and just to make sure you get like the latest bug fixes and everything else, and the fastest iOS patches, because we've been actively working on that for very hard for a bit now. Just try to make sure you're up to date as much as you can.
Correct. So currently, we only ever support the latest Flutter stable. That said, a working version of Shorebird we will keep supporting. So like we still support versions Flutter stable from over a year ago on the Android side, but iOS, because it's been in development, we have dropped support for various releases of Flutter. In fact, all of the versions of Flutter other than the very latest stable. So particularly if you're using iOS, you want to be using the very latest very latest version of Shorebird with the very latest release of Flutter.
And then we've got a question that asks, how big should an update be before I release a new version and not just patch it?
I suspect that that's probably more a policy question than a technology question.
Mhm.
The stores have restrictions about what you can or should not ship in an update. So again, the stores explicitly have allow, and again, because all the large apps do this, explicit allowance for updating, in the field. But in both of those restrictions, they talk about how your updates should not add, major new features, etc. You can read the guidelines yourself and make your own determination. But I think that's more likely to be a restriction on what you choose to update. On the Android side, so from a technology perspective, on the Android side, you can change as much as you want. You're not going to be able to slow down. Our system works well enough on Android that you're not going to slow it down. On iOS, there is sort of a pay as you go, and again, I don't mean money, but just like the more of your app that you change on iOS, the more you're forcing to run in the interpreter. And we will make the interpreter faster over time, but it's never going to be as fast as running on the real CPU. And so, each function you update is then made slower. And so you wouldn't want to, well, you could, and this is how iOS worked for 9 months and people still used it. You could run it all in the interpreter, but you probably don't want to. Because CPU intensive code like image decoding, or if you have like some really intense CPU thing that you're doing, you will notice a slowdown. So again, there's very little technical restriction. With some asterisk for iOS, you're more likely to run a policy restriction, would be my guess, in terms of size of your update.
And one other thing that's worth pointing out is that so the first time a Shorebird app launches, it will always run the base release version because it needs to ask for a patch and download the patch. So I would keep in mind as well that if you are your latest patch diverges significantly enough from your release that transition would be very jarring, or you've got some outdated, deprecated, whatever features in the base release, it's probably time to create a new release.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I think we've also seen people have success with uploading a patch and then also simultaneously queuing that up as a new release to the App Store. That way, you kind of get the best of both worlds. Like users immediately get the patch, but then anyone who's new and downloads the app from the store will also get that functionality, and it'll be running entirely on the CPU, as Eric mentioned. So I think there's a bunch of different strategies that you could apply here.
And then S. Piercer wanted to, all right, requested to speak. How do I?
There they
There
are.
we go. You got
Yeah, I think you can hear me now.
Hey.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to ask a small question here. According to your package, the Shorebird code push package on Dart, the only way to check or download new patches is asynchronously via futures and stuff. Is there a way we can implement some kind of stream, like a stream service where we can actively listen for new updates or new patches in order to use this without relying on a third party, like external real-time service?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I kind of tried to demo this a little bit last year at the Flutter and Friends conference using push notifications. So when I would create a patch, I would also send a push notification, and then the app would listen for those notifications and then check for an update if there is one, install it, etc. But we don't currently have anything built in to handle all of that for you. It's just something that you could build yourself if you needed to. But I'm not sure if anyone else wants to comment on the future.
This is the same implementation that I had in mind at first, like having a silent notification and then it does. This is why I asked if you have been planned that you want to do this in the future or not.
I think we've talked about potentially supporting that in the future. I'm not sure that we have a feature request open for it, but it might be something that we should just file an issue for. And go ahead.
So to make sure I'm understanding the question, the issue is that there's currently checking for new patches. It's a pull operation, and that you have to manually check. And what you would like is a push. No, it maybe not like
A stream
APMS,
way
but like a way for to be notified that there's a new patch.
Without relying on external services or third-party services.
Yeah, that's a little tricky because all of the standard push, obviously you don't want just any arbitrary service to be able to send a push notification to your app. But yeah, you're not the first person to want that, and yeah, we don't have immediate plans to do that, but yeah,
file an issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Will do.
Feature requests are always welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
And then let's see, did we? Yep, there we go.
Hi everyone. Hi sir.
Hello.
So first I tell about myself. So hi everyone. My name is Dipanshu, and I am currently a third year student doing BCA in India. So I want to ask you, sir, that how we achieve more in less time. Because I started my development journey, my technical learning journey in November 2023, and I have only the 1 year to achieve, because in the end the placement year will start in our colleges and I will start job searching. So how do I achieve more in less time in Flutter first, importantly?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a silver bullet. I think one thing I would caution, one of the lessons that I had to learn 20, 30 years ago, somebody told me that it's important not to compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 20. And I think the folks sitting on this call we've been at this for a long time. I've been writing C++ for over 2 decades now. But if you find me in the Wayback Machine and you find my website from when I was in college, you'll see I had no idea what I was doing. And I think that, if you're talking about being a second-year college student, I could barely put two, functions together, let alone, write a web browser or start a Flutter. Like, I think it's less about doing, I think about it less about doing more in less time and more just about following one's interests. Because the things that you like, you will do more of and you'll get better at, and that compounds. But the compounding takes a long time. I've been writing software professionally since at least 2003, if not sooner. So over 20 years. And it just takes a long time. I don't know if that's a very helpful answer, but that's where my head goes.
Yeah, I would add like just build lots of things, whatever, like if there's a problem that you have that you wish there was an app for, or something that you don't like try to just build it. And I think that's, at least for me, I learn the most by trying to build things and then encountering issues, and then I just deep dive as I go into the areas that I'm not familiar with. And yeah, I feel like for me that's kind of like the most helpful way to get some experience quickly. But yeah, like Eric mentioned, it just takes time. I didn't even know that I wanted to do computer science until after my third year of university. So yeah, like you have a head start on me at least.
Yeah, I'll echo all that. Yeah, I think I would say specifically tutorials are great, but I would also try to stretch yourself beyond tutorials, because tutorials will tell you oh, here's how to do this very specific thing, but you learn a lot by saying oh well, how would I do this thing that maybe there isn't a tutorial for, and you kind of stretch yourself a little bit by trying to build things on your own, and trying to learning how to solve problems is really the whole game. So yeah, it's just, you get better at it as you go. I look back, even the code I wrote even a couple years ago, and I'm just man, what was I thinking? This is a bad choice. And it's a process. You're always learning.
Yeah, Brian didn't speak Rust a year ago. Felix didn't speak C++.
Yep.
What's our next question, Brian?
Next question is.
So I have a few questions. I have few questions I want to talk to you from a very long time. So I got a chance. Can I ask few questions?
You can ask another question. What's your question?
So I want to ask that you guys are working from so long and you have produced so many apps and working open, so you work with talk and meet with so many developers. So I want to ask that how do we stay on top in any given of time that you guys have working for so long? That's I want to ask that. So you guys
guess-
never have a fear about that someone come and take your that we are working, we have a fear of AI, that AI will take over, or we have to set our benchmarks little higher, getting a job getting difficult, or we have to become exceptionally great at something.
Yeah, I mean, I would start by saying I'm not on top, right? There are people better than me in all sorts of things all across the world. And then I would also start by most of the world doesn't learn new things, isn't learning new things. And if you are in a point in your life where you are, you have very little to fear from new things coming, right? AI, if it feels scary to you, imagine somebody who's been working in their same job for 50 years, who does something that directly related to whatever current technology, is doing. You have so much you can learn, and will be so far ahead from that learning. So I would just encourage you to go out and fail. The only way I learn is by failing, as Brian said. And again, if you look up my website from 20-something year ago, you'll see lots of stupid stuff there. And I've done lots of stupid stuff in between. So I would wish you luck.
Okay. So in programming, there is a concept like mastery, or that so many people around me say you should focus on skill and you should master them. So in programming, is there something? If there is something concept like mastery, then how should we master something? Just like languages or framework, or what is mastery in programming world? I want to ask. If not, so we should be a jack of all trade and master in none.
Programming languages are like tools, right? And when you want to build the most beautiful cabinet or the most beautiful stairway in the world, you do not hire someone who knows how to wield the hammer the best. You hire someone who knows how to do the whole thing. Problems that we solve for people are not just writing Perl code or Rails code or, you know, Lisp or whatever, to name all the various languages that I no longer use, right? They're all about solving problems for people. And so the carpenter, talks to the customer, understands what they want, has maybe some artistic vision, and that's all unrelated to them being a master of their specific tools, which they also are. Anyways, I think we should keep moving on. Happy to continue this conversation over text on Discord, but I wish you well. It's a long journey for all of us. Did you have a next question, Brian?
Yes. Next question is: do you have any roadmap to move Shorebird to other platforms like Windows or Mac? What is the major difficulties, or what are the major difficulties in achieving that?
It's similar to other questions earlier. It's just a question of budget, a question of like engineering time. Moving to Mac or Windows is not technically that hard. It will take us a little bit of time and plumbing in the back end and stuff. But it's more a question of you're looking at the whole company right here. And so right now we support 2 platforms for 4 people. And if we add 2 or 3 more, then it's a platform per person. And we'll get there. I would like to get there. We certainly have many large customers who come up to us and ask, hey, can you support Windows? But it's not really a technical restriction so much it is just a budget restriction, a focus restriction.
Next one's an easy one. Before applying a patch to a Shorebird build, does it run on the interpreter or not?
It does not. The interpreter is only used on the in the builds that we put on the device, or should only be. I think we actually recently moved the underlying Dart that Flutter uses, like on your host machine, the like Dart command, from being the upstream Dart to our fork of Dart. And we did actually have some bugs for a while where when we were running local scripts, they were running in the interpreter, which they don't need to do. But no, in general, the interpreter is only used the interpreter is only used when patching. It's not even used when running your bare release build.
So next question is, I've heard a lot about engineering budget. Should we expect Shorebird to expand anytime soon?
Yes. It's always a balance building a business, right? So right now we have a few thousand monthly active customers, and in the hundreds of paying customers. And it's just right now we are spending more money than we're taking in. That will not always be the case. But those are things that we have to balance as part of growing a business. Right now the big things on our plate from an engineering budget perspective are we are finishing any remaining bugs that exist in iOS, because we've seen a trickle still from last week, even though we thought we'd squashed the last one. And then we are doing features that are blocking customer adoption. So like, for example, the rollback, it was blocking a customer. And so Brian is working on finishing that this week.
And the next question is, it says, hi, I'm fairly late, so maybe you guys have answered. I do not believe we have answered this particular question. how does Shorebird handle patches in terms of consistency? For example, how do you ensure clients who opened the app reliably install the update? One example use case is if I have a bad update out and I need to make sure no users actually execute that code, is that possible? And also, how is this done compared to other solutions like Expo?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I can quickly try to answer that. We got this question recently as well. I think we could do a better job in our docs. And we did try to update our FAQs, but the short answer is every time you push a patch, devices will install the latest available patch. So it doesn't matter if you have like 5 different patches over the course of a month and a user hasn't opened or hasn't launched their app in a month. Like there's no such thing as missing a patch. It's just whatever the latest patch is, that's the active patch. And that's what will be downloaded and installed on the device whenever the device boots up and checks for a patch. And then in terms of preventing a bad patch, we do have the ability to deactivate a patch, but until Brian finishes the rollback functionality, if someone has already installed that patch on their device and you've deactivated the patch later, those people will still have that bad patch installed on the device. Hopefully, like Brian said, we'll have rollback out very soon, and then you can mark that as a bad patch and auto roll back to a previous working version. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything, Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I would also add from the integrity standpoint. So if the concern is that, say, some wires got crossed while the patch was downloading or the patch didn't completely download, one thing we do when we are installing the patch is that we verify that so patches, for a little background, patches come down as binary diffs. So the patch that gets downloaded to your device is actually the binary diff of the compiled app compared to the compiled app in its patch state compared to the compiled app in its release state. So it's literally just the changes you have made as part of that patch. So the device running Shorebird downloads that, applies the diff to the base release, and it will check the SHA-256 hash of the expanded patch. And so if everything is correct, if it was downloaded correctly, if it applied the diff without any issues, that will pass. And so we do verify that. So there should never be a case where you're running, you try to apply a patch that doesn't apply. Like say it was most common place we see this is someone created a patch against a different base release. And so you'll see this in the form of a hash mismatch error. And also on disk, we verify that, and we have for some time verified that the size of the patch doesn't change. So if there's some on disk corruption that alters the patch file, if its size has changed, we will not attempt to boot from it. And recently, I think maybe about a month ago, we introduced patch signing, where you can cryptographically sign your patches, and it will the updater will verify that the signature matches on boot. So that provides an extra layer of security against patch tampering. And how is this done compared to other solutions? I'm actually not sure what Expo does, so I can't really speak to that. Eric, I don't know if you have more insight or if there's anything you want to add.
I'm just rereading the question. How do you ensure all clients who have opened the app reliably installed the update? I think we covered that in terms of you can't miss patches. You just always are installing the latest one, and the latest one is a diff from the base. How does, in terms of consistency, very bad update. Rollback is coming. Yeah, I if there are more questions here, we would be happy to ask them or answer them. I think we should probably handle that via text via one of our channels or send us a bug. But I don't know that I have anything more I can contribute here.
And the last question we have in the queue at the moment is, do you have intentions in the close future to hire, quote, regular software engineers, as in someone who is not a compiler guru?
We do intend to continue to expand Shorebird. It again is a balance of expanding the company versus revenues. And so as we continue to get more customers, I mean, I should say just in terms of like where we are in our journey, right? As I mentioned, we have thousands of customers, which may sound like a lot, but there are millions of Flutter devs, right? if I had to take a guess, there's about 1 million monthly active Flutter devs are on that order, right? If I had to guess, there are probably 100,000 people, maybe, probably more like 50,000, Flutter devs who know we exist, right? So our biggest problem right now is helping the rest of the world know that Shorebird exists. Because probably in those 900,000 or 950,000 people who use Flutter every month who don't know Shorebird exists, probably a few of them who want to use Shorebird. And so I think I would say to you, I would have an ask in that if you are using Shorebird and enjoying using Shorebird, we would love to support you in terms of talking at your local meetup. Like we have slides we can share, etc. Or if you're going to an event and want to talk about Shorebird, send us an email, ping me on Discord. We can even come and talk at larger events or larger meetups. But most of the Flutter world does not know we exist, even though this little bubble does. And we would love your help in that.
And the next is directed at Felix. How is the journey of learning all the things required to work on to fix iOS, which I presume means the Dart SDK work that you've been doing? Following the project seems like you picked it up very quickly. And are you sick of iOS bugs at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I picked it up very quickly. And I feel like I tell Eric this every time we talk. I feel so slow still working at that layer. But yeah, I've learned a ton. Eric has been super helpful, and also members of the Dart team and the Hackers Dart channel on Discord, as well as the Dart SDK docs, have been super helpful. But yeah, it's been a journey. I never imagined that I'd be working on the low level Dart SDK C++ work when I joined Shorebird, but I think it's been a lot of fun. I'm not sick of iOS bugs. I think to invest in more tooling so that we can more quickly identify what the issues are so that we don't spend as much time. Because I think the biggest thing with working at this layer that I've noticed is just the cycle times. Like it takes a really long time from having made a change to actually seeing whether that change works or not, just because builds take a long time. And especially if you want to test something in Flutter, you have to not only recompile all the Dart stuff, but then you also have to build Flutter with a custom engine. And so, yeah, you just end up sitting and waiting for builds, and it's not a lot of fun. But yeah, I've learned a ton, and hopefully we should be very close to not having lots of iOS bugs anymore. I think there's just a couple left that we're wrapping up. So maybe we can do I think one of the ideas that we had for future talks was contributing to Dart. So maybe that's something that if people are interested in, we can try to compile a bunch of resources that have been helpful when learning how to hack at the Dart layer. But yeah, I'm still very far from an expert, and I still feel like I'm going very slowly. So
yeah, contributing to Dart is that is a whole AMA unto itself.
Yep.
Next question is, are you guys planning to do more on CI/CD? We need CodeMagic integration, but when I checked, only the YAML version was supported. Is that something fixable? To answer that, I believe our CodeMagic docs were actually contributed by one of our users. So that's the beauty of open source is people use your thing and they find problems with it and they fix it themselves and they say, hey, what do you guys think about this? Here's a fix. Or I've gone down this path. This documentation would be helpful to other people. Here it is. If you do need something that we do not provide, this will be a common refrain. Please file an issue, file a feature request, let us know, because that's the only way we have to know that there's a need. I'm sure it is fixable. It's just I've never personally used CodeMagic. I don't know what specifically goes into that, but yeah, knowing more about what you need would be very helpful. And yeah. And then also, are you planning to build your own solution where everything is done through Shorebird and sent to stores? We don't currently have plans for that, but I would say, yeah, definitely it's possible at some point in the future.
My goal here is to build the Flutter company. And I mean that in a very broad sense. And I'm not trying to be exclusionary in that statement. It's just one of the frustrations that I had with Google was that despite I think Flutter being awesome, Google was never the Flutter company. They're an ads company, right? Like their bread is buttered in a very different way. I am trying to build an economic entity whose entire, lives or die by Flutter's success, right? By solving the multi-platform, stop writing everything twice problem. And so will we include CI/CD in that offering over time? Probably. We hope to be your stop as a business for when you want to use Flutter and you want to be able to shake someone's hand and you want to have a service that you know really works well for your chosen technology. We want to be that stop. But large working things are made out of small working things. And right now we're a small, hopefully working thing. And we have to have a really excellent code push solution before we can build excellent other things. And so we're focusing on the excellent first product first.
Cool. So that is, those are all the questions we've gotten. And it is, we're almost very tidily at an hour. I don't know if we want to have one last call for questions, get maybe one or two more in, but yeah,
I think I would point you to Reddit Flutter Dev. So we're doing an AMA in 2 days. It was just announced on the Flutter Dev Discord server while we were actually here. If you're on the Flutter Dev Discord server, you can see it. It's also, I think, going to be announced on the our Flutter Dev subreddit soon. So we're going to have an AMA, a text-based AMA on Reddit. The goal there being hopefully it will be more accessible to those around the world who can't appear in person on Discord. So please feel free to come and ask questions. We'll be all there on Thursday to answer your questions. As I mentioned earlier, right now, 95% of monthly active Flutter users do not know we exist. And we welcome your help in fixing that. So thank you all for coming. It was wonderful to see you all. We're happy to answer more questions over text. But otherwise, we're going to get back to coding. So thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.